CEC Gurukul lecture in continuation with the series on sociology of work. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss about industrialism. And industrialism, as we can try to understand in the lecture on industrialization, is the culmination of the process of industrialization. So, this theory of industrialism takes off where the theory of industrialization stops, because industrialization is a process, it is an ongoing process, and the theorist, the convergence theory kind of argues that once all societies have industrialized, they will all have similar characters and they will be kind of all will be having familiar features, and that is where industrialism would kind of start. So, then industrialization is a process and industrialism is the ultimate destination or the ultimate characteristic of industrial society. We kind of it also helps us to understand that only societies which underwent the process of industrialization would have the features or would have the characters which would be labeled as industrialism. So, industrialization sets path for industrial development. Industrialism focuses on the definition of industrial society. So, industrialization would help us to understand what are the changes which is happening in society, and then if we were to understand what are the features of an industrialized society, we need to understand the process of industrialism. So, when we look into the theory, and especially referring to the work of Ramaswamy and Ramaswamy, industrialization, we think about what is the impact on industry, what were the preconditions for industrialization to take place. Once industrialization was taking, what would be the consequence, what would be the impact of that, and in industrialism we will be talking about the salient features of industrial society. So, what was the logic of industrialization? Because the future of capitalism was not kind of uncertain, because rather capitalism in the sense had no kind of a competitor with the kind of breakdown of Soviet Russia, and therefore it was all left on its own. So, can we do a kind of comparison between capitalist society and the socialist society, which was not taking place because most of the society were kind of moving towards capitalism. So, the alternative was to do a comparison between industrialized society and industrializing society, or the other term is developed society and the developing society. So, all society were kind of traversing or going through the same routes of industrialism, but the speed in which the impact was being taken or the speed in which this transformation was taking place was different, and it was the speed in which the kind of change was taking place was dependent on the social culture of the society, the ideology of the society. So, some societies were able to adopt technology quickly and development progress was at a very high rate, but in certain contexts there was certain hindrance, social hindrance, certain kind of limitations which slowed down the space of the process of industrialization, and there was also historical conditioning which kind of slowed the pace of industrialization. So, they were labeled as developing or industrializing society. So, once this process of industrialization or the process of technological change begins, there was a kind of almost a very contrast between, say, the pre-industrial society and the industrial society. So, we had this most important characteristic of pre-industrial society was home-based production to factory mode of production. In pre-industrial society, agricultural activity was of most important economic process. In industrial society, we see factories, production, manufacturing increases. So, family was kind of a community, collective group, changes to individualism, it changes to kind of because people were on the move, they were leaving behind the family and their land and taking up work in industrial society. So, a clear-cut contrast can be made between pre-industrial society and industrial society. So, what was the cause or what was responsible for this contrast was technology. Technology was able to bring about a differentiation of skill. So, prior to the invention of technologies, scientific knowledge, people were almost similar skills. They were all doing more or less work which was dependent on the gender and age. once technology comes in, the knowledge of that technology starts making a differentiation between skilled worker, semi-skilled worker, unskilled worker, and now this differentiation not only creates a hierarchy at the workplace, but it will also kind of bring about an inequality in terms of the power to consume, because skilled manpower would obviously get a higher wage compared to the semi-skilled. So, their income, their earning would be higher, they would be about to consume more than the others, and therefore, inequality would become a very prominent part of industrial society. Now, once this knowledge of technology and other kind of skills are learned, mobility of labor becomes very frequent. So, people are going to shift or kind of change jobs. So, they will leave their place, they will go to another state or they will go to another country in desiring a higher income or trying to learn more skill. So, this demographic movement, or what we term as migration, becomes very prominent part of industrial society. Another thing which comes in, because the skill will determine the income, education becomes very important, because it is through education that the knowledge of technology would be inculcated. So, all kinds of knowledge would be kind of provided. So, in terms of technological knowledge, professional, managerial. So, education was kind of shifts from kind of not only providing information about your family and your society, but it becomes more kind of specialized, and there is kind of fragmentation even in terms of the education that is being provided. And education became one of the most important means of upward mobility. The more skilled technical knowledge one could acquire, you were able to kind of become more skilled and move up the economic ladder. We also kind of understand industrial society as an urban society. What does that mean? That means that agriculture is no longer a way of life. It is urbanism which is a way of life. So, urbanism in the sense of high density, in terms of impersonal relation and informal relation at workplace becomes important. It does not imply that agriculture does not take place, but it is that the number of people who would opt for agriculture as a mode of living has reduced. In industrial society, we also see an increased role of government. Because if we go to the pre-industrial society, it was more in terms of governance through hereditary and kinship. With the coming of industries, setting up of industrial society, the government gets instituted, and it is the most important institution for regulating the economy and society. So, laissez-faire kind of or free market kind of decline. And then we see that if we look into India as such, we see with industrialization, the government started having planned economy. So, we have the 5-year plan which comes in, and much of the 5-year plan is kind of focused on bringing about improvement in industry, in technology, in kind of geared at improving the overall economic condition of the country. So, state regulation of the market and economy increases. But it's kind of when we look into the state, which is kind of identified as omnipotent and kind of regulating, we also see that there is some amount of inconsistency with industrialism. Because some society, the state is stronger and able to control the market, whereas in others it fails and the economy starts dominating the political realm. So, the dominant feature of the so-called industrial new society is large organization with product, goods and services. So, from an food kind of subsistence production of foods and goods, foods and grains, the society starts engaging in manufacturing of goods and services, because this goods and services has to be exchanged in the market and income has to be earned. So, market becomes important, regulation becomes important, and market leads to competition. It led to kind of competition and the focus of society shifts from interpersonal social relations to economic, contractual, formal relation. The authority structure becomes very established, because it has to have a kind of authority which would be able to command the control over the organizations and economic process. So, when we look into industrialization and industrialism, there is a theory of pluralistic industrialism. Pluralistic in the sense that it is something which was kind of experienced by a number of society, and the convergence theory would assert that there is a kind of homogenizing impact. Homogenizing impact in the sense that the impact of industry on society was more or less similar. And this will look into the critique also, but just to keep in mind that one of the critique of this is that it kind of looks only into the economic transformation. It neglects the social and cultural transformation due to technology. So, when we look into pluralistic industrialism, we also need to understand that this science and technology, or the use of science and technology, is not taking place in a vacuum, or it's not taking place in an empty space. The use is kind of regulated. So, it also depends on the kind of nation state. It depends on cultural and ideological barriers. So, the progress towards industrialism would differ according to the political structures of the society. But the convergence thesis argues that all the society would converge, that is, move towards a common pattern under the impact of science and technology. The assumption was that the influence of science and technology is so strong that it kind of compel or force all society to arrive at the same point. So, it has been also negated that the entire process of industrialization was introduced in a diverse cultural social pattern. It was not similar. So, how does it move the diverse social cultural practices to a uniform or a universal structure is difficult to kind of understand. So, when we look into pluralistic industrialism, what we need to understand is how the forces of uniformity, and what is the force of uniformity? It's technology. But so technology is considered as overall powerful, and more stress is given on economy than the culture and the social and it was kind of then argued that technology would be the unifying factor. It would kind of convert society to the same point. And what actually happened is, if we look into the society and do a comparative study of societies which have undergone industrialization, we see that rather than an homogenizing effect, there is a large amount of fragmentation, and diversity has become more important. So, ideology keeps in mind, and it takes in by sense of realism, which is essentially conservative. So, some society have not been as progressive and have not been able to kind of progress because of the conservative ideology of, say, the nation or the political party. So, what is the homogenizing effect? Homogenizing effect is the kind of understanding that technology will unify, kind of bring society on a similar path. And if the level of technology increases, the occupational structure will become more diverse. So, the more technical the workforce becomes, so more and more technical skills the population learns, it will be lead to further fragmentation, and if we see the industrial society, we see that it was kind of each product was broken down into smaller component, and everyone had to have specialized skill to kind of manufacture that small segment. So, technology leads to kind of specialization within a very small kind of knowledge or of the product. So, this would make the occupational structure very diverse, each one having a very specific skill about a specific product. So, diversity and difference increases in an industrial society. The skill level of workforce will rise, and the workers will have to become more mobile. So, the more and more skill you acquire, the requirement is the higher skill, you would demand a higher wage or a higher income. So, workers becomes very mobile and kind of keeps shifting and changing. The performance of such workers will depend upon whether their consent has been elicited. That is, in order to kind of say you have got a certain particular skill to work, say you have got a particular skill to work in a say nuclear plant, as where very specific skill is required, yet it is dangerous and hazardous. So, the consent of the workers is required. So, more skill you require, you can take up more challenging tasks. All this process will occur irrespective of national, cultural and ideological difference. This is the statement made by the convergence thesis, that whatever be the nation, whatever be the cultural differences, industrialization or technology will kind of lead to a unifying force. The educational system will everywhere train people for new jobs and staff with better education and training. Wage level will rise and the number of people at the bottom of wage ladder will continuously decline. This is the second argument made by the pluralist industrialism, that all educational system would be geared towards production of particular kind of skills. So, more skills people will acquire, they will be mobile, they will move up, and therefore, those who at the bottom will be completely negligible. But if we look into the empirical reality of industrial society, today we see a larger workforce which is at the margin, which is at the wage level. So, the working force has kind of increased, and those who were able to move up the skill is only at the middle level. So, very few at the top, and they kind of large number at the bottom and the middle level. Eventually, the industrial man will want to combine progress with freedom, and this is something very important characteristic of industrial society, where we want to progress, we want to move on, but yet we kind of don't want to be regulated, we don't want any kind of restrictions. So, progress has been combined with freedom, and this we will discuss in the later lecture when we look into Krishna Kumar's idea of progress and prophecy. Here, let us try to re-examine industrialism. So, till now this entire idea of society moving towards pluralistic industrialism is being discussed. Now, let us look into the modification which happened in 1960s, and there were three modifications. Number one, the pluralistic industrialist theorists, they admitted that they had exaggerated the force of cultural barrier to industrialization. So, they were kind of negated that culture could kind of create a barrier to industrialization, and they thought that if technology was there, if industries were set up, it would be a very smooth movement towards industrialism. The second modification is that when industrialization takes place, it was all diverse, there were diverse culture, diverse societies, so it could not converge into one particular point. And then we also need to look into the recruitment and commitment of workforce. So, this idea that a traditional structure, agrarian structure, or a kind of a barrier to industrialization has also been negated. So, industrialism thesis attributed primacy to technology, which we have already seen, that technology was considered as foremost change bringing. So, the unifying force was due to technology, and they kind of saw technology as leading to triggering change in societies. Societies do not converge towards one fixed point, but towards a range of alternative with broad limits set by pluralistic structure. So, what the argument of those who reconsidered industrialism is that all societies are moving towards industrialism, but they will not converge at one similar point. So, for instance, industrialization in Britain and industrialization in India, we cannot see both of them at one particular point. They could be alternative place, but yet kind of considered as industrialized. So, the idea that what would be the end point is problematic, it is kind of debatable. it could be at different points yet considered as industrialized. So, a critique of industrialism, we need to critique the theory of industrialism, and here we need to kind of look into, we are not going to be biased, it needs to be a very objective empirical understanding of society that have undergone industrialization. And we need to kind of look into also that it's not always smooth. When the path of industrialization, there can be lot of violence, there can be lot of conflict, competition itself can be violent, and that could in itself hinder the progress of the society. So, the first critique of industrialism is the very nature of human society. The critiques allege that by conceiving industrialism as ultimate destination, the theory conveys that all social change would cease after the point it's reached. So, that is to kind of say that social change will come to an end, which cannot happen, because it is the reality that change and transformation is kind of a continuous process and it will exist. So, it's not that you set a point and after that the society will become constant. So, ultimate destination of society, even if it is reached, if we determine a destination, if a society has reached, even beyond that progress and development is possible. So, technological change is unending, there cannot be one particular point where it will end, and we have seen this, we have seen how any kind of a gadget or a machine is kind of continuously getting evolved, there is completely a renovation or taking place. So, then the second critique is that industrialism thesis argued that industrialization technology would lead to social equality, that since it will lead to more skills, people will acquire skills, the income level will improve and there will be nobody at the lower level. So, there will be a kind of egalitarian society. However, in empirical reality, we see that inequality has gotten exaggerated, it has kind of further aggravated between the haves and the have-nots, and we see there is a very small percentage who are kind of acquiring a lot of income and owners of capital wealth, and a very large margin who have kind of starving or even the hunger level has increased. So, industrialization was never kind of considered as leveling the inequality in society. Along with the social inequality, technology led to a digital divide. And today we know that digital divide, that is large population who are not even aware of the technology, are not even kind of educated enough to use this technology, are kind of backward, or they have kind of labeled as unprogressive. So, inequality has kind of not disappeared with industrialization. Then the third critique is that improvement in economic position does not lead to change in social status. So, maybe with technology comes in the say for an example, a factory, the production increases and the factory owner increases the wage of the worker, but the worker will continue to be at the bottom and marginalized even if his income, say monthly income increases. So, economic status need not necessarily imply improvement in social status. So, the logic of industrialization has actually failed, and therefore, by 1960s people started kind of arguing that all the convergence theory, pluralistic industrialism theory started seeing the dark side or started being criticized, and it was realized that development was taking place at the cost of environment, and today we know that it has indeed taken at the place of development, and we have felt the consequences of the development taking place at the environment, where environment is at risk. And now we talk about green earth and we talk about foresting and planting trees, because the development was taking place at a very fast speed, ignoring the social cultural reality of society. And with this we kind of became rather than industrialization supporting the progress and development, we became a victim of it. So, there is a decline in the ozone level, there is is a global warming, there is decline in the water level, we have so many consequences of this in terms of flood and cloudburst. So the environment in which we are living is in danger because of the pace in which industrialization started taking place, and this realization in the academic circle happened in 1960s. So when we understand that why did the logic of industrialization fail, or why it was not able to achieve what it had intended to. So the first was the understanding that it would reduce industrial conflict. The argument was that all would progress and be at the same level. This did not happen. So there is an increase in industrial conflict, not only between say different industry, but even the unrest within the industry increased, because the workers, even though they were improvement in the economic conditions, they were not able to improve their social status. So there was a lot of unrest, there was a lot of psychological if we look into the late 20s also, we see a lot of industrial conflict and unrest has taken place, and therefore in order to avoid industrial conflicts, level of alienation has increased. So we accepted machine as a part of progress and development, but we failed to make it as a model of society. New vision was to replace the older agrarian society with an industrial, progressive, egalitarian society, and see a society which was able to fulfill the needs of every individual, but it did not. What it led to was increase in inequality, and so 1970s, 80s onwards in sociology of work, we started becoming familiar to words like post-scarcity society, knowledge society, economic society, and the most important was post-industrial society. The term post-industrial society was used by Daniel Bell in his work, The Coming of Post-Industrial Society, and this is prediction. He is predicting that what would happen to society which was industrialized. So he gives us a three-phase evolution from pre-industrial to industrial to post-industrial society. And a post-industrial society is a society where economic changes from manufacturing to service sector. So industrial society, there was a lot of manufacturing. In post-industrial society, there is a growth of service sector. And it is also based, when we look into the debates on post-industrial society, maybe in the next lecture, we'll see how the post-industrial society frames a critique of industrial society. And then it looks into mass production, it looks into some of the features of post-industrial society. Before we end, let us look into the reference which is required for understanding industrialization and industrialism. The first is Ramaswamy E.A. and Uma Ramaswamy, Industry and Labor, which will talk about the process of industrialization. And second is Daniel Bell, where he talks about coming of the post-industrial society, but he will begin with the understanding of industrial society and critique it. And the third reading is Krishna Kumar's 1973 publication, Prophecy and Progress, where he critiques industrialism and post-industrial society. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.